engage, disrupt, adapt, repeat. You're listening to Pure Reinvention, the podcast for curious people.
Misty, we have a great interview to talk about today.
We had so much fun talking to Andi. I'm glad we were able to co-host that one together.
She was a great interview. The really nice thing about Andi is how she really is the embodiment of the young emerging professional that we really have to be paying attention to in the association world.
I like how well-spoken she is. She has some really great ideas, and because she's been in the association world for nearly a decade now, she has some interesting perspectives as an emerging professional growing up with great mentors. So we have a lot to listen for in this upcoming segment.
I really do, and I think she was extremely reflective in a lot of her thoughts. I mean, she had thought through the kinds of bullet points she wanted to share with us. They were, in your words, almost provocative in terms of how they really made you think. And I think as people listen to Andi's interview, they'll be very engaged in the major key points that she's sharing.
Cool, let's listen in and we'll come back and talk about what we thought at the end. I am so happy to be sitting here with Andi Osters from the Michigan High School Athletic Association today. She is the social media and brand coordinator for the association. Hi, Andi. How are you?
I am excellent, Misty. Been a while. Thanks for having me.
I know. And Andi's been a friend of mine now for, 5-7 years-ish. And we met in the association world, and it's been really great. We've shared experiences on committees and in our love for associations and as millennials and exploring social media. It's been a nice journey. So, Andi, why don't you tell us first what you do for MHSAA?
Sure, happy to do that. I've been with the association for almost 10 years now, hard to believe, but they hired me right out of college as an unpaid intern, and for some reason they decided to keep me on board after that, and it's been a really great ride. I think I've been so lucky to be part of this association for as long as I have, and haven't moved at all, which is really, really rare for a person of my age and education. I think a lot of millennials today move around quite a bit, on average every 3 to 5 years. So it's been quite an experience. I do all of our social media, some of our publication review. I also run the sport of girls fast pitch softball.
You know, Andi, that's an absolutely phenomenal recognition that you've made, that you have stayed in a position here longer than most within your age group. But what it also says it's something that you're passionate about, that it's an industry that you've been able to find a connection to. Many have recognized your role as an emerging leader within the association world, and I'm sure you have some opinions about how associations in their journey of evolution need to continually adapt in order to be relevant to the millennial generation that you represent. Can you share some of your thoughts as you've had a chance to observe over the years how associations can be valuable to this emerging group?
Mike, you ask great questions. It's like you've done this before once or twice or something. Sure, let me pick that apart one by one. I think that one of the ways that my association has been successful in my personal experience, they have always put a carrot out just far enough for me to look at it and say, that's worth my time, that is worth my energy, that is worth contributing to this association in a meaningful way. Whatever that carrot might be, and it's not always more money. Sometimes it is... It's as simple as we have an antiquated process that needs analyzing, that needs time and effort dedicated to it by a person who we deem capable. I think that we've been blessed here with a great executive director, great leader who, for me personally, his management style, and I'm speaking about Jack Roberts, his management style for me as a young person 10 years ago or so was really, really important in growing as an individual inside of my first office. He gave me good direction and then let me run. And I think that in some cases, for me specifically, it worked wonders because I felt like I had been invested in, felt like I had been told exactly what I needed to accomplish, but given free range to determine how that was going to happen.
You know, Andi, what's really interesting about what you're describing is, first of all, the tasks that you've been given were achievable, and you were allowed to own those tasks. And as a very important step in the reinvention process, that ownership, probably for many millennials, is probably more important than even compensation.
The accountability factor was huge for me, knowing that right off the bat, someone was saying, this is an important task, and we trust you with it. That is such a great motivator. That is a better motivator than anything else I can think of, is someone who you respect, someone who signs your paychecks coincidentally, saying, I believe in you, I am trusting you with this specific important task. When I was 22, 23, 24, and now even 10 years after that, that's still the thing that pushes me every single day to do better.
What's interesting to me is it doesn't sound like you were told, this is how we do it. You were told, how can we do it better?
I think I was told, this is how it's been done. I'm not sure if this is the best way to do it. If you think there's a better way, I want to hear about it. And then I was given, an opportunity to dissect things and look at things that this association was doing or that people had done in my position in the past without, some of the great technology that's available to us now, which I've always looked at as a positive, but maybe in generations previously it was intimidating or maybe not something that they wanted to dig their hands into because they didn't have the time or they hadn't been given that trust. And I think that that's something that associations moving forward, especially with 3/4 of the workforce about to be of that millennial generation, something that certainly needs to be embraced.
Andy, it strikes me that as you talk about the opportunities here at your association to make change, that then you've had opportunities to be on boards of directors and kind of take that same role in an expanded version to actually make a bigger difference. Can you talk about how millennials can start to take that ownership opportunity and expand it beyond their own specific job to get into a position where they can actually influence an organization through being on a board of directors or through other decision-making opportunities?
Well, if there's one thing that millennials are, it's eager. So eager, so anxious, so ready all the time. I think that the most valuable piece of being successful with other organizations outside of, whether it's volunteering on a committee or serving on a board, is you've got to learn how to monitor first. You've got to learn how to look at something objectively, first. See how it works before you try and change anything. I know that that's maybe a novel idea, but I think that a little waiting period before you jump into something, rock the boat, the way that you think it needs to be rocked. You don't know the history of that process or that board or that association or that city. You need to understand the history before you can make a change.
I completely agree. I know that's something I struggle with too, because it's like, okay, let's go, let's dive in, let's take action, and that's the great part. But that is something that Peer Reinvention tries to teach. Is a big part of it is getting all of your data first, asking questions, listening to people, understanding where they are, because you can't figure out how to go forward until you know where they are. So with that awesome advice for millennials, what has MHSAA done in such a huge industry as high school sports to manage those changes?
Well, there have been a couple in my tenure here, but more. I think I'm in the youngest set of people that work in our organization. So there are people here who have worked in this specific office for almost 40 years. So in their tenure, certainly a bigger kind of climate change. But in my 10 years, we've had some real challenges. Declining attendance being one, as people find bigger, better, warmer things to do on a Friday night. Certainly, we faced some adversity as an organization a couple years ago, facing some serious litigation costs, which forced us into an austere time as an organization, and certainly taught us some lessons about how to be nimble, how to adapt to change, and I think more than anything taught us about the value of preparedness, knowing that at any moment, your membership, your finances, any of these constants could change really in an instant. For us, they did. And that was critical for us to realize that moving forward, we need to be prepared for the same, if that makes sense.
Well, I think that makes absolutely perfect sense, and I want to loop back to a couple of thoughts that you had mentioned earlier regarding the importance of reflection to, before you have the answer, actually be able to assess and reflect. Andy, how did you learn that critical skill, and how have you found you've been able to apply that and actually teach some others where there might be a tendency to want to jump in with the answer, which I think is more of the tendency, yet we know most good leaders like yourself go actually a little counterintuitive, and they actually are able to learn that critical skill set of reflection before an assessment before they actually respond.
Sure. When I talk to folks who are coming into our office early in their careers or even going into any sort of business early in their careers. I personally learned those lessons by making countless mistakes, quite a few mistakes with elder coworkers who were graceful and poised in dealing with a very, very tenacious young person who wanted to make her mark right off the bat. I have things to say. I have a brain inside my head that works in a way that yours doesn't, and I want to prove it. I want to tell everybody in this office that I've got something important. I've got big plans for us and for my career and all this. Ultimately, for me, it needed to be about the work product and about the organization as a whole, instead of me trying to blaze a trail through the past. I needed to understand where we were coming from in order to move forward.
In doing so, you obviously build your credibility first before you kind of launch into the answer. But why is it that most people don't do that? Why is it that we tend to have to learn those lessons the hard way?
I think that we're instilled with that everything you're told from a young age, every test you take, every teacher that you are graded by tells you that ambition is never a sin. I don't believe it's a sin, but I think that it needs to be tempered with a little bit of tact. Is that the word I'm looking for? I work with a lot of folks who have been in this business for a lot longer than I have, and I'm sure they felt the same way coming out of college, ready to get into their career or whatever it was and make a bunch of money and make their mark and Lord, everybody's going to know my name and what I do. They will eventually if you do things the right way, but it's not going to happen overnight, and it's certainly not going to happen when you're 24. Not for most of us. I mean, I'm not Mark Zuckerberg. I don't know if you guys are or ever have been, but that's not the not-profit. That's not the not-for-profit world. That's not association management. I think it's a world where the reason why we recognize so many folks that have done it for so long is because they learned the lessons that are critical for good, successful organizations, especially in our business.
When you think about nimble, what you described specific to MHSAA, but I think it's true for anyone, when they encounter an event that dramatically changes the way they have to do business. Now, whether this is General Motors, whether this is the general economy that had a meltdown in the late 2000s and we all had to adjust, companies who are nimble, leaders who are nimble, tend to find a way to succeed. Can you share some of your understanding of how being nimble became a key characteristic of success?
Sure. Most of what I'm saying here is rhetoric developed by someone older and wiser than me. But I think that word nimble, when you're applying it to business or any sort of change that needs to be adapted to, I think it shows a business or an organization's willingness to move where they need to move to serve their constituents, members, customers, whatever it might be. Those needs change day in, day out. We all know that. But I think that the successful associations are the ones that look at their membership, continue to analyze that data, continue to look at what the needs of those members are, and continue to try and serve them the best way possible. So you can't stay in these antiquated processes. I keep coming back to that phrase, but I think that a lot of the things that associations do for members are easily, they can become really dinosaur-like. They become these
Archaic.
big, huge, yes, thank you, that was the word I was looking for, Misty. They become these big, huge, multifaceted things that we do, whether it's creating a publication, whether it's doing an all-member mailing, something that might need to be looked at with a new lens, in a new way, with a new budget sometimes.
Because apparently everyone inside of the company thinks it's great, but it's a bit antiquated when you take it out into the membership.
Right. It's amazing what happens when you put some different light on some of those things.
I'm so glad you mentioned looking at metrics. We have crazy amount of reporting tools today, especially in the digital realm. And if you aren't using those, you need to be using them. If you're not using Google Analytics on your website, oh my gosh, you're missing out, because there's so much feedback and so much to learn there. But I think MHSAA kind of learned a lesson that associations today are really just learning, and they learned it for 5 years, 6 years ago with that litigation that you talked about. So So I think MHSAA in a lot of ways is kind of a great example, a statewide example. And I know that a lot of people respect Jack Roberts, who's been a great mentor to you. And he's been on the board of directors. He's the past president of the Michigan Society of Association Executives. And now you have a role on the board there. So as a board member or as an association leader, a young emerging leader, how are you trying to drive home the value of listening to your consumer and letting your audience drive the needs?
It's a big question. Part of the reason why I was so excited to assume a board position with MSAE is because I think that they're at a critical time as an organization as we start to age out some of the association professionals that have been around for a long time and have all this institutional knowledge that needs to be passed down, that needs to be understood before they go off to play golf in Florida or wherever they're headed. Hopefully they stay in Michigan. But I think that one of the reasons why that board has such a unique task in front of it is because as we look at associations around our state and as we look at young professionals who are coming out of college looking for their career, I'm not sure that association management is as clear a profession as we need it to be to sustain what we have right now. And I think that moving forward, at least in the next couple of years, it's going to be critical that we look at professionals who are in this age group, my age group, I guess it is, and Misty's yours too. Mike, yours too, right?
Thank you. Yes,
sure.
You're absolutely right.
I think it's critical that we make it clear that this is a viable, sustainable profession, one that will give you all sorts of benefits down the line, one that is fulfilling, one that has a lot of different avenues. And for, like we mentioned earlier in the podcast, it could be just a stepping stone to something else. But I think that it needs to be shown that this is absolutely a vibrant kind of market that we have in Michigan. And I guess beyond, now that we're talking about it.
I think MSA is very lucky to have you on the board of directors.
Well, thanks,
and be
Mike.
able to utilize your attitude as a way to not only do you reflect on what the situation currently is, but you are driving the necessary change for success, and that's a phenomenal thing. Andy, you talked earlier about the story of Detroit, you spending some time in Detroit. Of course, ASAE 2015 is also going to be in Detroit. So could you spend a few minutes and kind of direct your thoughts to the people who don't have any experience in Detroit, who will be coming to Detroit for perhaps the first time or looking at Detroit in a little different light, and talk about some of the most recent experiences that you have had in the city of Detroit, and help the people who are coming to Detroit understand why Detroit is really also emulating the kind of a journey that you're talking about with associations.
There were a lot of questions there, Mike, but I'm just going to start talking about Detroit. I think that, at least in recent years, most of my experiences in Detroit, as one might imagine, have been tied to professional sports. I am a frequent Tigers game visitor. I love the Red Wings and the Lions, and not so much the Pistons, but I root for them when I'm watching basketball. And I think that recently my view of Detroit has changed in that I've been exposed to more events and opportunities in that city and in the metro area that are not sport related, that are in neighborhoods and places and boroughs that I didn't know existed. I've been to the Detroit, at least I went to the hydro boat races around the Detroit River. I've been there for the last 2 years. They might still be there this summer. It's still up in the air. And this past weekend, I was downtown and went to a fantastic restaurant that you wouldn't know existed unless you had done a ton of research. It was right down just outside of Greektown. It's called Antietam, and it is this old 1930s building that they have repurposed and redecorated with a really organic feel, and the food was fantastic, and the atmosphere was lovely, and it would have been a type of neighborhood where, I mean, if I had driven through it with my mother, she would have said, "You're not allowed to walk here alone." But I did, and I'm glad I did. And I think that when you're looking at ASAE, and I think that ASAE was so smart to select Detroit this year, or at least whoever had the foresight to select it was really smart, because it's a wonderful time in that city. And I think that the residents that have chosen to stay, or those who have chosen to come on in and embrace this new kind of change and urban development, I think that they're being rewarded with more events like ASAE coming to town. Folks from other states, other cities realizing that Detroit is more than they thought it was. And it's really exciting for somebody who's grown up a Lansing native for all of my life. Really excited that right down 96, there's still an fantastic community of new stuff to explore. And I think that ASE for young professionals is a good opportunity to not only, develop professionally, but also explore a city that you might not have been to recently.
Andi, you said a lot of great things about Detroit, and since you have such a nice experience with associations and with the city, are there any kind of takeaways you can share with the association professionals, young or old or whatever, that maybe they can learn from the city of Detroit that they can take back to their association? What is the city doing, reinventing themselves, that the associations can learn from?
Boy. I haven't done enough reading on this, but all I can tell you is kind of a personal experience. I think that what I just said about, walking into a place where I would have maybe in years past been, afraid as a single lady or even apprehensive about doing in a cab or going to places, exploring places where there are new things. There are new things that are popping up, and there are people taking risks to provide those opportunities for new folks to explore that city. And I think that's a huge, I see Mike nodding, he's really nodding. I'm afraid he's going to stroke out or something. But I think that concept,
we need a video cam.
That concept of risk and showing people that it's not scary. It is good to be brave. It is good to open a pop-up restaurant in a vacant warehouse, do things that are really, really outside the box that I don't think people would have thought of 5-10 years ago.
Well, Andi, I'm going to jump in here because I told Misty she was going to close, but I wanted
Sure.
to really make a point that I think a lot of times we don't, in any kind of a business, whether it's a not-for-profit or a for-profit, we are scared to take a risk. We think that risk is somehow so risky that it's a bad business move. Yet, a lot of success can be tracked back to someone taking that big risk. And I think that what you've described is Detroit is emulating those risks. They have had the space, people are being welcomed in, the people have taken the risk, and they're being rewarded. And that very same pattern can happen for associations as well.
You wrapped that up way better than I could have.
Andi, I'm so glad you were with us today. We enjoyed the conversation. It was a little fun. We got to give Mike a hard time, which he needs more of. And I've appreciated your time so much, and thank you for talking about your experiences and what you've learned.
Thanks for having me.
I am so glad we had a chance to talk to Andi, Misty. I really do believe she brings so many good ideas to the table for us to discuss.
She does. And we had a lot of fun with her. It's great when you can have that fun banter with someone and also be learning a lot from her insights. I loved what she said about how nimble associations have to be and how MHSAA has had to learn that the hard way through some litigation and some legal problems and near bankruptcy. And that's a scary place to be, but it is also causes a lot of growth once you do that sort of reset and say, okay, now how do we move forward and get back on our feet?
It's really interesting. I think that nimble word, everybody thinks they're nimble, but not until you actually go through the exercise do you realize how nimble you really are.
You got to be tested really to see it.
Exactly. And as Andi said, we had to go through this exercise, and through this exercise, it really taught us how to be nimble. And what then I learned that was really interesting was how Andi very much appreciated the role that someone in the association played as her mentor, someone that she really looked up to, someone that she could really embrace as someone that could give her the inspiration and the knowledge and the modeling behavior that was extremely important to her.
Yeah, the example she used, I think, was the carrot was just far enough ahead where it seemed realistic to reach for, and she felt like she had the support to reach for it, and also the room to explore and discover and rebuild something.
I believe that every professional, but especially the professionals that are going to be making a huge difference in the association world right now, want to have a degree of ownership that we must, as professionals, give them if they're really going to succeed and participate in the association world.
Well, and as she's becoming a leader, she is looking to the people that have helped lead her and the examples of great leadership style. So she's had some really good examples, and she's fortunate to have picked up those lessons and are emulating them now in her career.
Misty, Andi talked a little bit about her experiences in Detroit. What was a takeaway that you got out of her experiences in Detroit?
She, right there at the end of the conversation, she gave us that beautiful nugget nugget about risk taking and how sometimes it might not be a place that your mother says you can walk in at night, but maybe you should. Maybe a little risk is the good thing because you'll discover new ideas.
One of the, probably another way to look at it is many of the people who are pioneers would also have said that the unknown, the place that you go to the unknown is really full of great risk, yet that's where discovery takes place.
Right, that's where reinvention happens.
Absolutely, and so while it's uncomfortable, it really becomes one of the key characteristics to know whether you're truly reinventing or recycling. And for those of us that are really talking about reinvention, having a degree of risk, as Andi talks about, is critically important.
And I really like that she touched on her role as a board member for Michigan Society of Association Executives. I do believe they're at a critical point for the industry, and she recognizes it. So how fortunate for that association to have her input and her insight on the board.
And what I had recognized about some of the comments she made was, while she has a very definite opinion about what should happen, she's not an active activist on the board. She is reflective. She listens. She thinks through the issues that need to be addressed. And what that does, Misty, is that gives her respect. Sometimes when you want to make a change too quickly, and you do more talking than you do listening, others don't respect you. I believe Andi probably has a great deal of respect sitting around the board table because she's willing to listen first before she starts to initiate her ideas.
That was a really big takeaway for me in this. I loved her lesson on the monitor it, even though especially millennials are very eager. But a lot of people are. A lot of people want to come in and just, toss out everything and start over. But you have to learn the foundation and you have to understand where you are. And it's really impressive that she so eloquently described that lesson.
Interestingly enough, seek first to understand.
It
one
keeps
of the key
coming back.
Thank you, Misty.
Thanks, Mike. If you're ready to make a change, make it a change that lasts. Make it pure reinvention.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Pure Reinvention. Keep the conversation going and get alerts when new podcasts are up by following us on Twitter @Pure Reinvention or sign up for our mailing list at purereinvention.com.